My pleasure, and thanks for inviting me. Um, there's lots to say, and I'm hoping that this will just be the beginning, because obviously with um, with everything that there is to say, it takes a little bit longer. And whilst this is an unlimited account, we don't have the whole, we don't have the 24 hours. The Chabad Shluchim conference. I don't know if you heard. They had this Fabringen, which started Motzei Shabbos, not this Motzei Shabbos, but Motzei Shabbos before, and went all the way through until the last um, beginning of Shabbos in the world that they could. So it's the longest world record Zoom, thousands of people, hundreds and hundreds of hours, and that's an amazing thing. And the reality is that the topic that we're speaking about could do the same thing. But let's start off with some ideas, and just as a springboard. And if we want more, I'm happy to continue. It's a subject that's close to my heart, and I think it's an important subject for all of us to be able to see the interface between what we see as something separate from Torah, business, the way we work, the way we think, the way we start doing, and the Torah itself, and then starting using some of those examples. So just before we begin, what I'd like to do is just give this shir in the schus of the late Avram ben Yomin ben Aaron. That's your late dad, is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And if we can also, if you don't mind, there is a little girl who fainted today, and she's okay, but she hit her head and she cracked her skull a little bit, but she's okay. So her name is Oria Bella Batilana, and if we can also learn in her schools as well. Okay, so let's begin. So I've called this the paradigm shift of business transformation, just because it's a fancy name. But really, what I want to look at is what do we do as we go into the space that we're in, and are there lessons that we can learn from a Torah perspective, from whoever, and we'll see who that is, how to deal with these. So let's start. Firstly, this pandemic that we're in has created rapid change. We all know that. We all recognize it, and we're all living with it. And the reality is that it's changed the demands that our customers might have. It's changed our incomes. And there's a man called Itzhak Adizes. And Itzhak Adizes was he's quite old now, but in his day, he was really on the forefront of management consulting. And he said the following. He says that change creates problems and opportunities that need to be managed. It's what he calls a change loop, ongoing and forever. And he creates a category of people called thrivers. And who are the thrivers? Those who can adapt to these changes by managing the problems and opportunities that come from the change. So what does management really mean? What are we going to do with the problem and the opportunity? And once we decide what we're going to do with that, then how do we implement that decision? So obviously that's a great idea, and it's beautiful theories, and all management consultants have beautiful theories. The question is, how do we put it into real life? And what I want to start doing, and I think this is really just the beginning of a conversation. For me, if you guys want to continue it, I'm happy to do it. So we understand change is inevitable, and there's always market shifts, consumer behavior, technology trends, you name it. Things are constantly changing. And the difference between those who are successful and those that fail is the ability and the foresight to recognize the change, adapt to that change before it's too late. So there are two examples that we can bring. The one is Kleenex. So if I say to you Kleenex, the first thing you're going to say to me is, what is it synonymous with? You answer the question, guys. It's your call.
Tissues.
Correct. Kleenex. But look at the name. Isn't that a bizarre name for tissues? Kleenex?
Yeah.
It's a bizarre name. So in 1924, Kleenex started as a disposable towel to clean, to take off makeup. That's what it was used for. It was a disposable towel. The women could take off their makeup, and that's where it was marketed. However, in 1926, after asking for feedback, which is quite in itself quite a lot of foresight, 1926, there were customer feedback indicates that most people were using it because it was so much softer than the standard tissues that were being used. People were using it to blow their noses, And therefore, what did they do? They then changed their whole marketing ploy away from makeup and into blowing noses, and they doubled their sales. And the rest is history. Kleenex is synonymous with a tissue that you use to blow your nose, and nobody would even dream of thinking of Kleenex as a makeup remover. So that's the one. We also then have IBM in the old days, and IBM was this monolith. It was the really at the forefront of all computing, those massive mainframes, which I don't remember. I'm still a bit younger than that, but some of you might. No offense if you don't. But these enormous mainframes, these enormous with massive computing power that wasn't really that big considering what we've got today. And IBM did not move with the time. They didn't want to go into a more personal computer until they really lost an enormous amount of their market share. There's a company, as we all know, called Under Armour. Under Armour is a company that was a sports clothing company, right? They changed. They changed completely from being a clothing company to an innovation and experience company. Why? Because that's the feedback that they got. So the organizations that are nimble enough, that are quick enough, that are sufficiently nimble is a good enough word. Okay, to respond to the changes. Okay, they are able to capitalize on the changes that happen. And once we understand that, what we need to realize, and I think, and this is the way I always try to work my way, is to say, where are we going to start with how to find models of acting in perhaps in one way, moving to another way, which are the models that we should look at, and what is the overriding picture that we should have in the way that we live our lives as a general rule. But also, when it comes to our businesses, what are the things that we're supposed to be looking at? So there's an amazing masechet, an amazing tractate that you all know very, very well, called Pirkei Avot. So Pirkei Avot, if I ask you what does that mean, you'll tell me?
Ethics of the fathers.
Ethics of the fathers. So the word Pirkei does not mean ethics. Pirkei means chapters. A perek is a chapter. It's something that tells a story. So Pirkei Avot is the chapters of the Avot. Who are the Avot? On a simple level, if I ask you who the Avot are, you're going to tell me. We know from the Pesach Seder, who knows 3, 4, all these other things, right? Who is Pirkei Avot? So what is Pirkei Avot? The Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. So let's try and realize now that when we speak about Pirkei Avot, we're not talking about these lessons or the ethics of these great sages that lived at the time after the destruction of the Second Temple, but rather we're actually looking at the lessons that we can learn from Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, who are real Avot. The others are just the ones before. And what I want to do now is to go into a couple of those examples to start creating call it a Torah-based business model, or 2 or 3. And let's see where that starts. I'm going to just share my screen with you. Can everybody see?
Yeah.
Okay. So the first thing I want to look at is this Mishnah in Pirkei Avot, which everybody knows. It says Shimon HaTzadik. Shimon was the Tzaddik. He was the Kohen Gadol. He was known as the Tzaddik, as the righteous person of the generation. He was one of the last men of the great assembly, the last men of that really was the end of the unbelievable greatness and unity that existed of the Jewish people. And he who now carries the Masorah, carries the tradition from all the way back from Moshe, all the way down from Sinai to all the different aspects, he now makes a statement. And he says the following, Hu haya omer al shlosha dvarim ha'olam omeid. The world rests or stands on 3 things. Al haTorah, Val ha'avodah, Val gemilut chasadim. Stands on these 3 things. And the way the Bartanura is one of the commentaries on the Mishnah says, Lo nivra olam ela b'shvil shlosha dvarim elu. The world was created for these things only, for Torah, avodah, and gemilut chasadim. Which means that if we can find points and kind of like milestones within each one of these aspects, we can now start holding on to the very fabric of creation in finding a business model that perhaps might work and at least gives us something to start working with. So what is Torah, what is avodah, and what are gemilut chasadim? So the word Torah is a word which comes from the word hora'ah, which means to teach. So Torah really is a cerebral, it's a brain space learning. It's very much something that is thought through. It's a logical process. It can take us from one space to another, and the ability to connect dots all over is really what Torah is all about. That's Torah. Avodah, on the other hand, is something much more structured, because the word avodah means service, and the concept of service in what he means is service in the Beit HaMikdash. But any service is prescribed. You can't just serve. If I don't know, on just our most simple level, if I'm a waiter in a restaurant and I come to you and I just start giving you things, right? Because that's what I thought would be a good idea. It's ridiculous. That's not good service. That's just silly. Service is always prescribed by structure, prescribed by specific rules. So you've got Torah, which is the cerebral space. You've got Avodah, which is the structured space. And then you've got Gemilut Chesed. Gemilut Chesed is about relationships. That's what it's about. It's about me connecting with another person, or with people, or with businesses, or with things around me. So on the one hand, we've got a strategic process, which is Torah. On the other hand, we've got form and structure, and the word that we like to use nowadays, protocols, which is Avodah. And the final one is we've got Gemilut Chasadim, which is the relationships. And what I'd like to do is run through Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, those three forefathers upon whom these things are based. Because if we can understand that Pirkei Avot is the lessons of our forefathers, then it must be that they based what they did on 1, 2, 3, or maybe one of these pillars in doing what they did. So let's go through that and let's look at some examples. Now, I've got quite a lot of information. So I'm going to go quite quickly if you don't mind. But I would like to just throw out some ideas that we can start to see that we often read what we read in a very basic way. But if we read a little bit deeper, we can see things that are kind of mind-boggling. So let's start. So we know at the end of the parsha of Noach, what happens is we're introduced to this man called Avraham. We don't know anything about him, actually. The Midrashim tell us all the stories about Avraham and the idols and all those things. You all know those stories. I don't want to go into those stories. But we introduced to this man, Avraham. And Avraham's father's name is Terach. And the Torah says, kind of like out of the blue, that Terach takes his son Avram, his name is not yet Avraham, right? Takes his son Avram, and he takes Lot, who is his grandson, and he takes their wives. And where do they go? They leave the place called Ur Kasdim where they were. Where to go? Where? Laleket out to Canaan, to go to the land of Canaan. The land of Canaan is Eretz Israel. Vayavo ad Haran, vayeshvu sham, and they come to Haran, which is on, if we're looking at Israel, that's on like Saudi Arabia side, right? They get to that area, vayeshvu sham, and they stop there. And the question is, why did Abraham go with his father to go to Canaan? Where is the impetus from this all coming from? And it's quite an amazing thing. So we don't really understand Abraham. He was on such a deep level, connected to Hashem, all these different things. But something that does come out for me that was quite incredible is that what makes Abraham a great leader, which means is that now if we would look at on a business level, if you would look there's directors, management, and workers, let's call them. So the directors are the ones that are supposed to create strategy. The managers are the ones that are supposed to execute on the strategy, and the workers are the ones that are supposed to work to make sure the strategy gets executed upon. So in this whole story of Terach going with his son and his grandson and their wives and everything to Canaan, the question you have to ask yourself is, who's the director and who's the manager here? Because we always see Abraham as the main proponent of all the stories of Abraham. But it would seem to be that in this case, Terach is it. But the Netziv, that's the next source here, Ha'emek Davar, he says, Terach to Abraham, his son, to go on the land of Canaan, Even though there was not yet a divine word to Abraham, our father, there was a heavenly illumination. He saw the sanctity of the land from afar. Abraham recognized the sanctity. It was part of his strategy. His strategy is to bring people closer to Hashem and to connect in the most profound way that he can. And that's his focus. And everything that he's going to do is going to be based on that. And if that's the case, that's lesson number one. Lesson number one is we've got to have a focused strategy. Because very often what we do is we go into our businesses and we don't have a focused strategy. We have a strategy like, well, oh, what about this? It's like an ADD strategy, okay? And it's and the problem with that is that it doesn't allow us to really achieve what we're wanting to do. Abraham has a strategy. He wants to connect closest with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and his business model is to get customers. His customers are the people that are going to, he is going to connect to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. How does he do that? That we can get to when we get there. But what's happened now? He's immersed in godly ideas or wisdoms. Okay, he's busy working on the strategies. He's busy making sure that he get his business plans and his budgets and everything in place. And he was unable to direct the journey for him and his household. Now look at this. This is mind-boggling. He delegated the trip to his father, who took Abraham and all the baggage upon himself. He had a director of logistics, and that was his dad. And when I saw this, I just thought, here we are. You know, one of the Barmy boys that has recently had a bar mitzvah is dyslexic. And I was chatting to him, and he's got such chayin, and he's got such confidence. And I said to him, does it bother you that you're dyslexic? He says, no, it's just difficult to read. So I said to him, that's amazing. I mean, that's his only issue. So he said to me, no, you know, Richard Branson's dyslexic, and he's gone through a whole bunch of these guys who are powerful business leaders that are dyslexic, right? Because they did what Abraham did. They delegate to the jobs that they can't do. So that is already a fundamental, a focused strategy and clear delegation to the people, the right people who can do the right job. And it's clear that he's the right person, that number one, he trusts his father, that things will go the way they need to go. And number two, his father's obviously good at this job. Why? How does he know that his father's good at this job? Because he saw from his previous experience, he ran a shop, and it meant that he had to get stones in so he could make little idols, he had to sell them, he was involved in the details, so he understood that. So I think that that's an important aspect of how we judge people, is knowing also the where they're coming from, the experience that they might have. If you don't mind, I'm just going to mute. There's a bit of background noise. Okay, so that's the first part of Avraham Avinu. Let's carry on with him for a little bit and see what else we can garner. As I said, Avraham Avinu has a very, very focused strategy, right? Because why? Because it speaks about where he went. And he goes there, and he goes from one place to another, and he pitches his tent to there, and he builds an altar to the Lord, and he journeys by stages towards the Negev. Why does he go to the Negev? So our sages tell us he goes to the Negev because there is a statement in Chazal, in our sages, that the materialism comes from the north, and spirituality comes from the south. He wasn't interested in the materialism. He's interested in the spirituality. So he doesn't put himself in a place where his customers are not going to be. He puts himself in the place where his customers are going to be, which is in the Negev, which is down south. But then we know what happens. We know that there's a famine in the land. And after the famine in the land, because there's a famine, he goes down to Mitzrayim, and we know this whole story that happens where the king thinks that Sarah is his sister, and he takes it, it's a whole business, and I don't want to go into that. But what happens is, after that whole story happens, it says, from Egypt, Avram went up to where? Into the Negev with his wife and Lot, and everything they possessed. And he's very rich with cattle and silver and gold. Can you see? He's become exactly what he didn't think he needed to be. And he proceeds by stages from the Negev as far as Bet El to the place where his tent had been formerly between Bet El and Ai. But look where his focus is. He may have money. He may have all of these things, but his focus is on his ultimate strategy, the site of the altar that he built there at first, and then Avram invoked the Lord by name, because his whole thing is all about his focus strategy. Yes, he's made a lot of money on the side. but the whole thing is his focus strategy. And I think that that's a very important thing, that we can get lost, and I'm not talking about money. We can get lost because we see what we think are possible opportunities, and if we don't focus on our strategies, then we get lost. Now that goes back to the piece of paper, that a PDF that I sent through, that you know, when we see, when I said there, what are your strengths, what are your weaknesses, your business strengths, your business weaknesses, like that's something that this now starts to need to be unpacked. Is a strength of yours a focus strategy, or is a strength of yours possibly is a weakness, an unfocused strategy? Have you even developed strategies, proper strategies together? Have you put it, has it been communicated to the people that you work with? Every single person knew what Abraham's thing was. Nobody thought that he was looking for money, so much so that if we remember, there was a story where Abraham goes to save Lot from the kings that captured him, and when he comes back, the king of Sodom says to Abraham, "Yeah, take all the booty from the spoils of war." And he says, "I don't want them. I don't want it to be said that I became wealthy because of the king of Sodom." Why? Because that's not what he wants. He doesn't want his reputation to be one where he gets money. He wants his reputation to be the type of person that he is, who's trying to develop a product which we would call today monotheism. Okay. After the story, and you'll see where this plays itself out. After the story of this destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, which we all know about, I'm just assuming, guys, if you don't know about it, stop me and I'll go through it, please. Right. So after the story of the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, the Torah tells us, if you see here in source number number 13, Abraham journeyed from there to the region of the Negev and settled between Kadesh and Shur while he was sojourning in Gerar. Abraham moves from where he was to go to another place. Why? Rashi tells us. It's amazing. Because he realized that the cities had been destroyed all around him where he was. If the cities are destroyed, it means that the travelers aren't coming there any longer. And if the travelers aren't coming there any longer, then his whole product is absolutely useless. It doesn't help him to keep his factory in, in Popsfontein if he can't get transport from there. It doesn't help. So what does he do? He takes his whole business and he goes away from there. He goes there for a practical business reason, because his customers are not going to be there any longer. It takes a lot of bravery and a lot of courage to move a business that you've established for many, many years. But from Avraham Avinu, we see, if you've got a focused strategy, then the bravery is not such bravery. It's just business savvy. But there's another reason why. And this kind of goes into something that is often we're scared of, but it's important. The other one, Rashi says, why did he go there? He went there because he wanted to get away from Lot. Lot was his nephew. He was the guy that came with him, and he was one of the boys, one of the original founders of the business, one of the original partners. Lot was there at his side at every single moment, but he wants to get away from Lot. Why? Because Lot has now got an evil reputation. As you know, the story that his daughters got him drunk and they slept with him and they had children from him. So it's so important. A while ago, I worked with a company in Cape Town where the FD was, when he started out the business, he was very good. He was very good because he had rudimentary knowledge of accounts, rudimentary knowledge of profit share concepts and all those other lovely things that we like to speak about. And it was great. But as the business grew, his rudimentary knowledge stayed rudimentary, and he never learned anything new. And he never asked anybody for advice. So there was a point where he couldn't even handle a basic budget of 17 different SKUs, which was going to move to more and more and more and more. And so the question was, what are we supposed to do with him? Because he's one of the furniture. You know, the partner, the owner, the main partner said to me, you know, I used to travel, and whenever we used to go, you know, on all the different international road shows, you know, we used to sleep in the same room. we drank whiskey together, we had breakfast together, he knows my children, he knows my wife's name, all these other fantastic things, which are beautiful, but they were destroying the business. If you have a focused strategy and we're clear where we're supposed to go, if the person, as Jim Collins says, is not going to get on the bus with you, you don't want him on the bus because it's not going to work. Okay, so that's Avram the entrepreneur. Avram, we now move to the next one. Avram, we can see, is very clear in the way he thinks. He is the Torah. He is the one who, in terms of strategic focus, he's the ultimate in strategic focus. But once you've got your strategic focus in place, then you have to be clear about your protocols, your systems, and all those other things. So let's have a look at Yitzchak, and we're going to see something that's quite interesting, because I think Yitzchak, in many ways, is the COVID specialist for us. And I'll show you what I mean. So there's so much on the story, but what happens is Yitzchak gets married. He marries Rivka. We know the story, how he finds her by the well. They have these two children, Yaakov and Esav. And what's unbelievable is that we don't hear about him engaging with them at all, but we do hear the story. Vayirav ba'aretz, there's a famine in the land. Similar to the famine that had happened during the time of his father Abraham. So he's second generation business owner. Abraham is dead, he's the next guy. The question is, what is he going to do? Vayelech Yitzchak, Yitzchak goes to Avimelech, exactly what his father did, to Gerar. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu comes to him and he says to him, "What's it, buddy? Not the right thing to do. You're not supposed to go down there. Don't go down to Mitzrayim. Stay in the land that I want you to stay into." So what's happening here? Why did Yitzchak want to go towards Mitzrayim, towards Egypt, to follow what his father did? Isn't that the normal thing that one would do? You're a second generation. You've got clear structures. You've got clear protocols of what to do in certain situations that worked for the previous generation. So it just makes sense that you're going to do the same thing. And Hashem says to him, no, you can't do that. You know why? Because you're living in a different paradigm. You're living in a different world. It's not the world of the 1940s, 50s, 60s, 80s, 90s. It's 2020. It's COVID. You can't go down to Mitzrayim. The gates are closed. You have to make another plan. So what does he do? So Yitzchak stays in Gerar. And when he stays in Gerar, Hashem has just told him, don't do what your father did. And you know what he does? He does exactly what his father did. He says, this woman is my sister, and the same story happens. And it's amazing. The story unfolds exactly the same way. And but because of that, Yitzchak becomes very successful. It's an amazing thing. All these guys, these kings steal their wives. Hashem says, don't touch her. And then they come out and they all get gelt. So, that is a model. I don't know which model, but it's not a good model. But if you think it's going to work, maybe try it. Okay. So what happens is Yitzchak has done all these things exactly as his father did. He hasn't been successful. He hasn't really made a name for himself. And then he does something out of those protocols. He does something different. Now remember, with the way it described Abraham as being a man with flocks, with sheep, with servants, all of these things. Abraham was a man who owned an enormous asset base. One thing it never tells us that Abraham did is that Abraham never planted anything. He wasn't a farmer. But all of a sudden, Yitzchak says, hold on a second. I can't carry on those protocols that my father did, because in carrying on those protocols, I haven't been successful. Isaac sowed in that land and reaped 100-fold the same year, because Hashem blessed him. What happened here? What happened that because he plants on his own, Hashem blesses him. So very often we the way our sages explain is that because we're so involved in the paradigm of somebody else, and we're not maximizing ourselves, we're not maximizing, as on those sheets, our strengths, our weaknesses, our possibilities. We're not looking at trends. We're not doing all of these things. Because we're not doing that, we're going to say, well, God's not looking after me. But the reality is that we're not looking after ourselves because we're not looking to find how to maximize those things. And when we maximize those things, we make what's called the kli, a vessel for that bracha that Hashem can give us. And that's exactly what happens to Yitzchak. The minute he moves out of the paradigm of his father, everything starts going fantastically. Vayigda, he grows richer and richer and wealthier and flocks and herds and large household, except there's a problem there. Everybody doesn't like him, which is an amazing thing, because the same thing didn't happen with Abraham. Abraham also became extraordinarily wealthy. So how come Abraham didn't have the same problem with the Plishtim, with the Philistines, that Yitzchak had? Now that's a very big question. So the answer is pretty simple. You know why? Because Abraham, you can see, is always talking to people. Abraham, the way the Midrash tells us, he planted this thing called an esher, like a little boma in his backyard. You got a boma and you got trees and water and beers and everything and a bra running all the time. It was very lekker. We all would have gone there, right? And his whole thing was he engaged directly with people all the time. But Yitzchak doesn't engage with anybody. Yitzchak is very closed within himself because he's all about the structure. He's not about the engagement with others. He's not about trying to find new ideas. He's just structured in himself. And because of that, he doesn't develop relationships. Remember, Abraham was worried about his relationships. He's worried about his reputation. He's worried about the people. He's worried about his customers. Yitzchak doesn't have that. And so the negative relationship he has with the Plishtim manifests itself in their jealousy. And now he's under deep stress. And you know, we all know when we're under deep stress, which is what this period of time has been. COVID has been a terrible time for stress, for everybody. But when we're under deep stress, what we do is we default into our original way of being. We stop being creative and we kind of lock ourselves down. And when we lock ourselves down, we saw what happened earlier on when Yitzchak stuck himself in the protocols of his father. Now, the Plishtim are jealous of him. He can feel that enmity. So what does he do? Look here. And the Philistines stopped all the wells his father's servant had dug in the days of his father Avram. So Avimelech says to him, go away from us. So he goes. And then what does he do? Instead of doing his own thing, he redigs the wells of his father, exactly what his father did. And you know what happens? He causes sorrows for himself when he does that. Because if he keeps staying in that same paradigm of doing the things that his father did, because that's his comfort zone, he's never going to be successful. And it keeps saying, you'll see there in like verse 19, the servants dug and they found spring water, and then they had an argument, and he called that Asek. And then he dug another well, and they disputed that one. He called it Sitna. And now look what it says. And it says, he moved from there and dug yet another well, and they did not quarrel over it. Why did they not quarrel over it? Because he did it. Not his servants. He didn't delegate. He went himself. He engaged himself with the people. He started digging the thing himself. He started using his own creativity. And because he's using his own creativity, therefore, HaKadosh Baruch Hu blesses him as well. Because now he's starting to maximize himself. Goes back to that page, right? What are my strengths? What are my weaknesses? If I've got a certain strength and I'm not using it, then I can't expect to get bracha from it. And I think that that's a very important factor that in our lives, is part of it being just to look deep into ourselves. Who am I? Am I doing what I should be doing? Am I doing this thing that I should be doing? And unbelievable. The proof of that is this verse number 23. From there, he went up to Be'er Sheva. He moves out of the space of Avram Avinu completely. He's no longer in Gra. He's no longer in the place where Avram was. He goes on his own, and it's now that he's on his own where he starts gives the bracha to Yitzchak and Esav, and all things start playing themselves in a different way, and we see Yitzchak in the man that he is. Okay, so that's Abraham. We've got is the man of thought, of vision. Yitzchak is the man of structure, but is the man of structure who stays in structure and doesn't succeed because it's COVID time. He forgot to adapt. And the minute he starts adapting and using his own creativity, thinking about what he can do, and sometimes, as we saw with Yitzchak, it meant that he had to move completely out of this pasturing, shepherding lifestyle into an agrarian economy. Complete difference, complete change. And the minute he changed, what happened is that he got wealth. And the minute he got the wealth and he developed himself, we saw that what did he do? He started recreating all the herds and all the flocks and all the things that he had before, because he was able to go back to his own structured essence, but he needed to show his creativity. The same with the water. When he was trying to do whatever Avraham Avinu did, that didn't work. The minute he went out on his own to redo something, that's when he became successful. So that's avodah. So there's Torah, avodah. Now I want to look at the last one, is Gemilut Chasadim. Am I going too fast, guys? Or are you okay? Are we good? Okay. So let's have a look at Yaakov, because Yaakov is the most fascinating. In what's it called? In a Kabbalistic speak, Yaakov is the synthesis of Avraham and Yitzchak. He brings the two together. And let's see if we can see this and how it manifests itself. So, the story we know. Yaakov is running away from, so all of this, by the way, what we're going to do now, this is all out this week's Parsha. Which is, when I was preparing it, I just realized there's so much in it. We could carry on this for years, but let's start. It's all this week's Parsha. So what happens? What happens is the following. It's so amazing. Yaakov runs away. He comes to this well. He arrives at this well. There are these shepherds standing there waiting, because we know there's this massive rock on the well and they can't all take it off. And he comes up to them and he says to them, Achai. Now it's translated as my friends, but Achai really means my brothers. It doesn't mean my friends. He says to them, how's it put? That's what he says. May I not tell him, where are you coming from? And they say, Vayomru mecharan. They say, we come from Haran. And it bothered me. Here's a man, he's never seen these guys before, ever. Now you call him a brother. How do we see people that we don't know and say, how's it put? It's like bizarre. It's the most bizarre thing. But says the Netziv on this, he says, he taught himself to speak in a manner of love and brotherhood. Therefore, he called the shepherds that he didn't know my brothers. In other words, he worked on himself to be a person that in the manner in which he engaged with other people, he created relationships. That's Gemilut Chasadim, right? It's not like Avraham Avinu. Avraham Avinu had a mission. He was running around there trying to make people close. So he connected out of his mission. Here, Yaakov, remember, is the man who sat in the tents and learned Torah the whole day. That's what his role was until this whole story with where he, inverted commas, deceives Esav. He sat in and learned in the base medrash. How come all of a sudden he taught himself to engage with people in a profound way so that they would feel that he cared? And when you do that, then you get a response. Not, who the hell do you think you are? But they say, we come from Haran. It's amazing. Something important. The next story that happens with Yaakov that is indicative of the person that he is this crazy story that happens. We know, right? Yaakov falls in love with this beautiful woman, Rachel. She's the younger daughter, and her father gives Rachel to Yaakov as gives Leah, the older daughter, as the wife, and it says in the morning he wakes up and says, oh my gosh, what's going on here? This is not the woman I wanted to marry, right? Which is, just the whole concept is quite difficult to understand. And he goes up to Lavan and he says to Lavan, why did you do this? What would you have done? Clive, what would you have done?
Just unmuting, sorry.
No problem.
I suppose I would have done the same thing. Go up and find out, why did he deceive me,
In such a nice, calm way.
Well, no, not in a nice, calm way.
I think not. I think not. He goes up and says, what did you do? Lavan says to him, no. The way we do it here, we don't marry off the younger one before the older one. So what would you have said? I'll tell you what I would have said.
Yeah.
I would have said, Potts, why didn't you tell me that at the beginning? Right? Here I am. I'm marrying this woman. Right? I'm supposed to marry her, and you just kind of like threw in a new condition. So I saw from an article on from one of the top Rosh Yeshiva at YU that he said, yeah, there you see the amazing person that Yaakov was, because Yaakov could have argued this. He could have argued from a halachic point of view. He could have argued from a moral point of view. But what he recognizes is that there's a certain culture in the space in which he is, and he has to be part of that culture. We can't fight the prevailing cultures. We have to adapt to those prevailing cultures. And I don't mean value-based cultures. I mean just cultures. You know, you can't say, I'm going to serve, silly example, that's what I had for supper, salmon, you know, in Maitland. It's not going to work. You know, you can try and sell it till the cows come home, but it just ain't going to happen, right? You can't, you know, you can sell fancy shoes in the townships, but it's not going to work to sell, I don't know, other things. It just doesn't work. So if that's the case, then we need to adapt and adopt into the cultures in which we are. I saw there was, sorry, Clive, you want to come in which we are, and that's an important factor in this whole story. So Yaakov goes. He's prepared to do what his father-in-law wants him to do, and he goes and he marries this new woman, and he serves another 7 years, and then the Torah goes and tells about all the different children that are born, and then it says after Rachel had Yosef, Yaakov says to Lavan, "Okay, I want to go home now. I want to go home." Why does he want to go home? He wants to go, if you look at the word, El Makomi Ula Artsi. It's the same word, La Artsi. It's the same concept as what Hashem said to Abraham many, many years before. You got to go back to, you got to leave your place, right? You got to leave your homeland, all those other places, to go to the place I'm going to show you. Yaakov wants to go back to his homeland, because his homeland, unlike Abraham's homeland, was the place in which he could manifest that initial strategy that Abraham Avinu had. He realizes now it's time to go. Why? Is there different midrashim explain why, but not important. He says to you know what? I want my wives and I want my children. I want everyone. It's very similar to the travel that Abraham had. It's time for us to go together and go to the place where we go to go. And his father says to him, I see that Hashem has blessed me because of you. So you know what? Tell me, I want to pay you for the work that you've done for me. Now, just indicative of this whole story, let's understand how long he's been there. There were 7 years for Leah, 7 years for Rachel. Then he's got 11, some say 12, including Dinah. 12 children up till now, with 4 wives. The one had 6 children. So we're looking at least 21 years that he's away, and he hasn't paid him a cent. Oh yes, he's given him board and lodging, but he hasn't paid him a cent. He says, "I know you've done so well, because the little you had before I came has grown." He says, "The Lord has blessed you, and now you know what? I need to make provision for my own household." So he says, "Okay, so what do you want?" So Jacob says, "I don't want anything. Don't pay me anything, but rather I want you to do something. I want to go and I want to take the flocks, and we're going to do a little bit of like a cheshbonya. Okay? I'm going to remove every speckled and spotted animal, anything that's got any type of coloring in it. Those are my wages. Okay? And I want you to know what? And the way the Torah presents it, he says, and tomorrow, I want you to understand, I am going to be 100% honest. So obviously, that's a value. And Lavan says, okay, fine, not a problem. So what does he do? He takes all the spotted and speckled and everything that any type of color on it, he takes them away from Yaakov. That's Yaakov's wages. He puts them into a trust fund with his sons. And he puts a journey of 3 days. What's he trying to do? He's trying to get out of having to, he knows that if there's a colored sheep, that colored sheep will probably have other colored sheep as children. So he tries to move that away, and Yaakov takes all the beautiful white, pure white sheep and goats and goes and shepherds them. But Yaakov's got a brilliant idea. What he does, he takes these rods, and these rods are very complicated. I've never got time to go into it. But these rods, according to many of the Mefarshim, are the concept of using new technologies. Yaakov is stuck. He's stuck. What would have happened if he had been able to take all the spotted and speckled sheep is that he would have taken them, they would have mated with one another, and would have come more spotted and speckled sheep. Now he's got only the white ones. How does he know? He doesn't know about genes and all the other things that we understand. How is he going to get spotted and speckled sheep from the white ones? So what he does is he takes, the way the Netziv and others say, new technologies. Because when we are challenged by the world which we are faced and by the difficulties and the obstacles of which we are faced, where are we supposed to turn? Are we supposed to say, oh, there's nothing I can do about it? Or are we supposed to say, hold on a second, let me go search on the internet. Let me go and see that I'm not the only person in the world who's been challenged by this. Maybe there's a new technology for me to look at and to realize that I can do something that maybe I would not have done before. And what does Yaakov do? He does this, and the Torah says in verse number 43, so the man grew exceedingly prosperous and came to his own large flocks, maidservants and men servants, camels, and that's exactly what Avram and exactly what Yitzchak, the same thing happened to all of them. And this is really like the front part of the shir, because the Emek Davar, the Netziv, says the following. It's appropriate to know that although Yaakov performed intensive actions, i.e., he went into the technologies and he did research and he did all the things that he needed to do without hashgacha pratit, without specific divine providence, would not have been possible for this technique to be effective. And I think that's important for us. That sometimes we go into a space that we think we've done everything that we can, and it's still not successful. Because the truth is sometimes it's just not. Yaakov was successful, but he learned from his father, Yitzchak. If you'll remember, when we spoke about the wells, he learned from his father, Yitzchak, if you're not successful, just keep trying. That's what the Chofetz Chaim says. So we have a mixture of these three paradigms, or three models. The first model is the Torah. The first model is the strategy. Be clear on a strategy. Be clear where you want to go, and be clear on the values that drive that strategy. That's number one. Number two is create the structures. But don't be completely bound by the structures, because sometimes those structures in certain circumstances are not actually going to be beneficial. Sometimes you have to not revisit strategy, but revisit just a few things that may be necessary in order to get you back on track. Like Yitzchak did. He went and he planted. It's not part of his normal thing. He planted, he becomes wealthy, and he once again sucks that back into his business to buy all the flocks and the sheep. And finally, there's a very important aspect of everything, and that's relationship capital. There was a woman, I can't remember her name, but she was one of the hotshots on Wall Street, and she spoke to the 2018 a graduating class of Harvard Business School. And she said to them, you need to understand, you're leaving Harvard Business School with an MBA. If you're leaving Harvard Business School with an MBA, the world is your oyster, because you can go anywhere. I mean, that's the MBA of in the world. She said, but understand that you'll go to a certain job, and in that job, they will expect a certain level from you. But because you're a Harvard MBA, they'll expect, let's say, level 3, and you'll give them level 4. Then the next time they give you a project, they're expecting level 4, but you'll give them level 6. But there's a certain point where you can't go any higher. And when you can't go any higher, you cannot use just your practical knowledge. You can't just use your brain. You can't use your strategy. You can't use your systems. You can't use any of that. When it gets to a point, the one thing that you've got left for you is your relationship capital. And that's ultimately what makes Yaakov successful, is his relationship capital. And so I hope that I've given you some food for thought in terms of what we can do in our businesses, what we can do in our lives. And that is, firstly, do we really have a well thought out strategy? Do we really have systems in which to execute on that strategy? And have we built the relationships to enable that execution in the best way? That's where I'm at. I think there's much, much more to be said. We can unpack each person's business. We can do whatever we need to do. Ivan, I hope that I've given a structure in which to fall into. Any questions? I'm open.
Rabbi, yeah, can I ask a question?
Sure.
And it's really indirectly related to what you've said, but something that's quite pressing, I think, in our own Jewish community currently in terms of business practices. If there are such good ideas and such good guidelines in terms of business practice emanating out of the Torah, is there any kind of ombud structure within the Jewish community that is either established or should be established in terms of the control of ethics and the practice of these lessons learned from the Torah, or the malpractice of lessons that should be learned from the Torah in our own community? What do you think in that regard? And I know it's veering off on a tangent, but it is very, very pressing, particularly in the kashrut sector.
I'll try that one.
To be specific, I'm talking about the fact that Nussbaum's Siegel gets Nussbaum's license. I'm being specific.
Okay. Look, I don't know anything about that, to be honest. I think about the license transfer, that I don't know anything about.
Well, let me give you a little bit of background, because I think it's quite critical, and maybe one of your shiurim should be about where we find a lesson in this regard.
Yeah.
If individual A goes to the Beth Din and says, I'd like a kashrut license, and they say, sorry, we've given out all kashrut licenses. The only time we can give you a kashrut license is if one of the existing operators actually ducks out of operating.
Okay.
And then that individual makes sure that happens and comes back to the Beth Din and says, I believe there's a license now available. And the Beth Din says, there's the license, go out and practice, my boy. Should there be some kind of an ombuds authority to say, where's business ethics in our own community?
Yes, I think, you see, the problem with our Beth Din is a kashrut department. Our Beth Din is also our
legal
space.
Yeah.
You can't be referee and player at the same time. That's the problem.
Yeah. So I think theoretically that's the role of the dayanim on the Beth Din to manage that, not the kashrut department. I don't know that case, but if that is the case, then you as an individual who may have been wronged by this, I don't know if you are, but
no, I'm not being wrong, but I'm just disgusted by it.
Yeah. So you are entitled to bring that case before the Beth Din. The Beth Din is at the moment. The Beth Din is the ombudsman of halachic practice within the country. So your proposal is that there's been non-halachic, or let me rephrase that, non-halachic behavior by those people who purport to behave in a specific way, and should the Beth Din be looking at that? The Beth Din, as in the Beis Din, let's call it. The Beis Din be looking at the Beth Din in terms of their current business practices. The answer to that, I believe, okay, I know it's being recorded, but I think the answer to that is yes, because there's no one who is beyond reproach. None of us are. So if we are able to be able to take a certain level of feedback, which would assist us in becoming better Jews, better people, better businessmen, better whatever, we should be able to do that.
I suppose my question is, in terms of the shiur that you've just given, should there almost be separate Beis Dins In other words, a Beth Din for business practice independently of the kashrut arm of the Beth Din.
Yeah, so theoretically that is the case. But they, you know, like de jure, de facto. De facto, it's not really. You know what I mean? Because it's all intertwined. But I think that's part of the issue. As part of the issue is when you don't have proper checks and balances, then you can never really achieve the end that you want to achieve with a proper focus. You know, and in no way am I in any way implying that anybody's doing anything nefarious. I'm just saying a check and balance by definition.
I am.
No, that I got. That I got. That I got. That I got. Yeah.
I just think that it's a good opportunity. I think it's a good opportunity for the business community to almost secede from the Beth Din and say we take instruction from the Torah, including the Ombud's instruction.
So the question then will be is, well, who determines what the Torah says?
Yeah, exactly.
And I think that's a scary one.
And
I think there are, just in this forum, for example, I'm looking at Ivan, I'm looking at Clive, I'm looking at Leslie, I'm looking at Wayne, I'm looking at Ronnie and Avi. Every single person in this forum is more qualified than any Dayan to judge the application of business ethics in our community. This would be a better Beth Din than the Beth Din we've got to do anything about judging any aspect of business practice.
But yes, but your assumption is that the how to put it, like that morality and halakha, well, your understanding of morality and halakha are always at idem.
Well, I'm looking to someone like yourself to write that code that from a business perspective, these guys who've had years amongst themselves, you're talking about 300-400 years of practice here. Of running businesses would be able to apply the code. And there's not a single person in the Beth Din who's ever run a business before.
Yeah, so what needs to be created is, and that's what they call the board, but that's the board of the UOS, not of the Beth Din. And maybe what should be is that the Beth Din should be creating a consultant, a group of consultants, men such as yourselves, who are businessmen on different levels. And I'm not talking about only the wealthy guys. The wealthy guys, where the guys get, the big wealth get chosen.
Yeah.
And,
they're on the Zonda Commission. The wealthy guys are going to be on the Zonda Commission. There's another place for them.
Bizarre. But people who just, run small, honest, good, decent businesses should also be part of that consultancy. Perhaps, I think that maybe is your key to as a suggestion, is to create that type of structure which would allow for involvement and for check and balance from let's say from a street morality, if you know what I mean, as opposed to
from a business morality. You look at the Bushiri matter, for example,
right,
which was a business. If the commission on religious businesses were to have a code of ethics emanating from the Torah in terms of sound business practice, that they could then apply in a judging ethical practice in businesses, whether they were religious businesses or retail businesses, it would be far more of a guideline than currently exists.
I hear you. I do hear that.
It's all right.
Anyway, it's just a thought.
Okay.
I think we've also, Rob, Johnny, I think what was great tonight was we've had a few shurim on, not only here, but generally been to somewhere. There's always something we're trying to bring business ethics or business stuff relating to Torah. But I think what Ava's just said as well is that there's always been this like separation between whoever's giving that shur who understands more Torah, then the next guy understands more business. But there hasn't been a nice balance like you put across this evening through our three fathers, explain to where it fits into business. And I think that's, for me, was like it's a no-brainer, because we go in and say, okay, the halakha says do ABC, make sure your scale's balanced, and you're never going to take and you're never going to give. Okay, so what does that really mean? If I was given a piece of cheese that weighed 103 and I marked it 100 because that's what I was told, is that my fault? No one knows the answer. And that's where I think maybe what I was trying to say in the same way, he had a more specific point, is that it's very difficult to find somebody in religious studies that understands the real business, that it helps us as business owners or employees or workers or whatever it is to enhance our business is taken forward, using Torah and business to make sure we move forward more ethically, more Torah taught, if you like, etc. And that's what I've always found very difficult. And we've always been very interested in the ethics of business from a Torah perspective, but we're not getting, and we're finding it very difficult. And I just admire what you did tonight. Thank you very much. It was great. And I think if you have it and we can, I think there's definitely more and more scope. And
Terrific.
Can you imagine if this was taught in the schools as part of
Exactly.
the business curriculum?
Yeah, it'd be unbelievable. That's a good point.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That is
So
an
speak
excellent
to
point.
Rabbi Woodman, we'd be only too happy to look at
Yeah.
implementing that.
Yeah, I think that's
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Thanks,
Kol hakavod.
guys.
Shkach, Rob,
Thanks,
thank you. Excellent. Excellent.
Thanks, guys. Thank you, Ivan, for organizing it. It was great.
Thanks,
To meet those who I haven't met and to see again those who I have, and should all be well. And
thank you.
God bless. Have a beautiful Shabbos, guys.
Thanks,
Yeah,
you too, Rabbi.
Awesome. Thanks, Rob.
Thanks, guys.
Now you guys know I'll move to London for a while. I have to try something new.
I've been speaking about business. Where are the frozen refreshments?